The winding highways of New Hampshire stretched ahead like ribbons under the moon's soft gaze. It was late, far too late to be on the road, but Betty and Barney Hill had decided to press on, eager to return home to Portsmouth after their impromptu honeymoon detour to Niagara Falls. Their dog, Delcy, dozed in the back seat, oblivious to the quiet hum of the car and the muffled crunch of tires against pavement. Barney kept his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes flicking occasionally to the rearview mirror. He was tired, more than he'd admit aloud, but the stars overhead were unusually bright and the air crisp with early autumn's bite. In the passenger seat, Betty clutched a travel guide, turning pages aimlessly as the dark trees along the highway rushed by. "I think we should stop soon," she murmured, not looking up. "We'll make it to Portsmouth by dawn," Barney said, though even he didn't believe it. "Just want to get past Franconia Notch." Betty's eyes were drawn upward, past the windshield, to a strange glimmer in the sky. Not a star. No, it moved too deliberately. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, then leaned forward, squinting through the glass. "Barney, look." He followed her gaze. The object was there, hanging low and oddly still. Then, suddenly, it jerked sideways, moved up, then down in smooth arcs, like it was dancing. "That's no plane," Barney said, trying to sound confident. "Must be a satellite." "No satellite moves like that." They watched in silence as the light grew brighter, sharper. It pulsed, faintly, glowing with an intensity that felt almost intentional. Barney slowed the car, pulling off to the side of the quiet road. They stepped out, the gravel crunching underfoot, the forest breathing cold night air around them. Betty took out her binoculars. "It's spinning," she whispered. "It has windows." Barney's jaw tightened. "We should get back in the car." But the night had shifted. The air was heavier, charged, and above them, the object descended. Barney held his breath as the object hovered in the sky above the tree line. It was large now, undeniably so, and no longer a distant curiosity. It was something real, something present. Its movements were smooth, gliding noiselessly, as if the air around it bent to its will. Betty lowered the binoculars slowly. Her voice trembled. "It's coming closer." Barney's instincts, sharpened by years of cautious living in a world where safety was not always a given for a black man, screamed at him to leave. But something held him in place. Curiosity? Dread? Some invisible force? He couldn't say. He looked back toward the car. Delcy had pressed herself against the rear door, ears low.
"I'm going to get a better look,"
he muttered. "Barney, no." He was already moving, the cool night wrapping around him like a shroud. He retrieved the binoculars and stepped forward, crossing a patch of road that opened to a small clearing. The object hovered now, perhaps 80 to 100 feet above him. He raised the binoculars again and saw figures. Humanoid silhouettes peering out of windows. They moved, deliberate, coordinated, watching him. One turned and seemed to signal to the others. Panic stabbed through his chest. "They're looking at me," he gasped, backing away. "Oh God, they saw me!" He spun around and ran back to the car, the gravel skittering beneath his feet. "They're going to capture us," he shouted as he climbed in. "We have to get out of here. Now!" Betty, wide-eyed, slammed her door shut. "What did you see?" "Not people," he whispered. "Not normal." He threw the car into gear and peeled away, the tires shrieking as they fought for grip. Betty twisted in her seat, watching the light follow them, effortlessly, like it was tethered to them by some invisible line. Then came the humming, low, pulsing, vibrating through the dashboard into their bones. The light grew closer, closer. "I think they're directly above us," Betty whispered. Barney's hands clenched the wheel, his vision blurred, and then everything stopped. A sudden silence blanketed them. No memory, no sound, just stillness. They were 35 miles down the road. The road stretched on in eerie silence, the headlights illuminating trees that blurred together like a dream. But something was wrong. The atmosphere inside the car had shifted. Time itself seemed uncertain, elastic, untrustworthy. Betty blinked slowly, trying to reorient herself. "Barney, what time is it?" He glanced down at the dashboard clock. Nearly dawn. But it made no sense. They hadn't driven long enough for that. He shook his head. "We should be closer to Indian Head, but we're past Lincoln?" Betty looked around, recognizing nothing. "Did we take a wrong turn?" "No, I didn't stop. I didn't—" He rubbed his temples, the pressure building behind his eyes like thunderclouds. They said nothing more as they drove the rest of the way in silence, the car wrapped in a thick fog of disquiet. Delcy whimpered in the back seat, restless and alert, as if sensing something her humans couldn't grasp. When they finally reached home, the comfort of their small Portsmouth house felt distant and artificial. Betty drifted through the motions, feeding Delcy, making tea, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She glanced down at her dress, a torn hem, dust smudges, strange pinkish stains along the collar.
Barney, something happened.
He stood in the bathroom, staring at his shoes. The tops were scuffed in a strange pattern, as if he'd been dragged sideways through gravel. And his watch stopped, frozen at 5:16 a.m. and refusing to tick again. "I don't remember driving through Ashland," he said. "I remember hearing beeping, metallic beeping," Betty whispered, "right before everything went black." He sat beside her. The silence between them was heavier than words. What could they even say? That they'd been followed? That time had gone missing? That something, some force, had come down from the stars and brushed against them? Betty looked out the window toward the sky. "Do you think we saw a UFO?" Barney hesitated. "I don't know what we saw, but I know it wasn't from this world." And in the quiet corners of their minds, pieces stirred, fragmented images half buried in fog, bright lights, cold hands, a humming that lived under the skin. The nights that followed brought no peace. Betty's dreams began first, vivid, unsettling visions that clung to her even after waking. She would jolt upright, drenched in sweat, breath caught in her throat. She saw a vast metallic hallway. She saw beings, tall, pale-skinned, with wraparound eyes and hands too smooth to be human. In the dream, they examined her, speaking in flat, unemotional tones. And always, Barney was nearby, lying still, unaware or unable to move. "They took me onto a ship," she whispered one morning, her tea untouched in her hands. "I was on a table. They showed me a star map. They told me things." Barney glanced up from his coffee, silent. His sleep had been troubled too, though he wouldn't admit it. He'd begun waking up with an aching jaw, his muscles tight with tension he couldn't explain. Sometimes he swore he heard echoes of the beeping sounds again, metallic tones just beyond the range of memory. He didn't want to believe what Betty suggested. He was a man of reason. He worked for the Postal Service. He read the news. He trusted facts. But there was something undeniably wrong. Betty started writing her dreams down, page after page. It poured out of her, not like fantasy, but like memory. They came every night now, repeating, deepening. In one dream, a being told her, "We will not harm you. You are just interesting." She would wake shaking. Eventually, unable to ignore the mounting anxiety and confusion, they reached out to the Air Force and filed a report. It was formal, detached, the kind of report that hinted but never claimed. But the seed was planted. Investigators came. Questions were asked. A case number was assigned. Then came a name, Major James MacDonald. Then NIC ARP. Then the whispers, others across the country reporting similar encounters. Still, the dreams did not stop. "I feel like something was done to us," Betty said. "Something we aren't allowed to remember." Barney looked away. "Or something we're afraid to remember." They needed answers, and in the quiet, sterile office of a soft-spoken man named Dr. Benjamin Simon, those answers would begin to emerge, one memory at a time. Dr. Benjamin Simon was calm, methodical, a man trained in the treatment of trauma. He had no stake in flying saucers or the fantastic. His office was neutral. Books, chairs, the quiet tick of a clock on the wall. Yet even he could sense the weight that Betty and Barney carried into the room like a storm cloud. They had come to him seeking peace. Nightmares plagued them. Anxiety followed them like a shadow. And most troubling of all, they couldn't account for 2 full hours of their lives that night in September. Dr. Simon proposed hypnosis, not to discover the unbelievable, but to soothe the mind, to unlock the buried tension. But what surfaced under the gentle hum of trance was not simple anxiety. It was memory, raw and aching. Barney went first. "I'm driving. The car won't move. I try, but the engine's dead." His voice trembled in the quiet room. "There's figures in the road, tall, grey skin. I don't want to look at them." His breath quickened. Dr. Simon watched closely, taking notes. "They're telling me to come out, but their mouths aren't moving. It's in my head. They say, 'I won't be harmed.'" A pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh God, I'm being led up a ramp, into a room. It's white, metallic. I don't want to be here." Dr. Simon gently guided him out of the trance. Barney was drenched in sweat, shaking. He didn't want to believe the words that had come out of his own mouth, but they had come, unbidden, as if pulled from some hidden vault. Next came Betty. Her descriptions mirrored his in eerie detail. The craft, the beings, the examination. "They scraped my skin," she said under hypnosis. "They looked into my mouth. They took samples. I asked where they were from. And one of them showed me a map. It had stars, lines connecting them." "What did they say?" Dr. Simon asked gently. "They said they came from a place where the lines met. In session after session, pieces locked into place. Not fantasy, not delusion. Shared memory, somehow repressed." When Dr. Simon reviewed the tapes, he was troubled. He didn't know what to believe, but he believed they believed it. The sessions continued through the cold winter months, each one peeling back layers of memory wrapped in fear. With every trance, Betty and Barney revealed more, not just about that night, but about themselves, the vulnerability, the helplessness, and strangely, a kind of quiet awe. "They didn't hate us," Betty murmured after one session. "They studied us, but not cruelly. It was like we were animals they didn't understand." Barney was less sure. His sessions were racked with tension and shame. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, being taken, and yet even he began to wonder whether their experience was more than a terrifying anomaly. He sat with Betty one evening, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the quiet shimmer of stars outside their window. They said nothing for a long time. "What if people don't believe us?" he finally asked. Betty turned her head slowly. "Then they don't believe us. But we know what happened. We saw it. We lived it." He nodded, but his jaw clenched. "I'm scared it's changed me." "It has," she said softly, "but maybe that's not a bad thing." Their story eventually reached the ears of a journalist. Then a book was written, The Interrupted Journey, Then radio shows, interviews. The public's fascination grew. Some called them brave, others called them delusional. The world looked at them with curiosity, admiration, suspicion. But behind the noise, Betty and Barney returned to their quiet lives in New Hampshire. Delcy grew older. They still took long drives, still talked in hushed voices beneath the stars. Sometimes Betty would look up and wonder if the beings were still out there, watching. Barney, in his heart, wasn't sure he wanted to know. Dr. Simon closed their case gently. He could not say what had happened, but he could say they were not lying. And for Betty and Barney Hill, that was enough. Time, like the night sky, stretched on, endless, indifferent, and filled with quiet wonder. Years passed. Betty and Barney moved forward, though the memory of that September night never truly left them. It clung softly to their days, like fog in the valley at dawn, never overwhelming, but always present. A gentle whisper of something greater than themselves. Barney, more reserved in the aftermath, returned his routine with steadiness. He rarely spoke of that night anymore, not in public, and not even much to Betty. But sometimes, in the early morning, he'd sit quietly on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the stars fade with the light, his thoughts drifting like vapor. Betty continued to research, to connect, to wonder. Her dreams no longer haunted her. In fact, they sometimes brought comfort, a sense of belonging to something vast, even if unknowable. She wrote letters to astronomers, theorists, and other experiencers. She read everything. She never stopped asking questions.
But they lived,
Above all, simply, with love, with purpose, with the quiet courage of those who had seen the world change and still managed to hold on to their humanity. When Barney passed away in 1969, Betty carried the flame alone. And though grief shadowed her, she never gave in to bitterness. She spoke openly, tenderly, about their shared experience, not as a warning, not as proof, but as a story, a mystery, a truth only they had lived. In her final years, she often returned to the hills of New Hampshire, alone now, standing beneath the night sky with her hands in her coat pockets, the wind curling around her like a memory. Sometimes, a star would move a little too smoothly. Sometimes, she smiled. Whether it was real in the way the world demanded proof, or real in the way a soul knows something beyond words, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she remembered. What mattered was that they saw something impossible and survived it. What mattered was that in a quiet moment under a sweeping sky, two ordinary people had been touched by the extraordinary. And above them, the stars still turned.